Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Kaye, for your service to our country for many years. We're very proud to have people like you who are willing to serve the country. Dr. Kaye, you find yourself today in a very highly charged political environment, and you are by nature a scientist and not one who's familiar with these kinds of passions around election year. And I think it's important to establish your belief and that of the overwhelming body of intelligence and the intelligence community, both here, overseas, and in the Clinton administration, the following facts. Saddam Hussein developed and used weapons of mass destruction. True?
Absolutely.
He used them against the Iranians and the Kurds. Just yes or no?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And UN inspectors found enormous quantities of banned chemical and biological weapons in Iraq in the 90s.
Yes, sir.
We know that Saddam Hussein had once a very active nuclear program.
Yes.
And he realized and had ambitions to develop and use weapons of mass destruction.
Clearly.
So the point is, if he were in power today, there is no doubt that he would harbor ambitions for the development and use of weapons of mass destruction. Is there any doubt in your mind?
There's absolutely no doubt, and I think I've said that, Senator.
Good. But it's important to emphasize this point when we look at what has obviously been an intelligence failure.
I agree.
When you answered a question from Reuters, what happened to the stockpiles of biological and chemical weapons that everyone expected to be there, your answer was simple, quote, I don't think they existed. So what needs to be established here is that when we remove, at least I believe is your view, and certainly mine, that, as you just stated, America, the world, and Iraq is a far better and safer place with Saddam Hussein gone from power. And the sacrifice made by American citizens and that are serving and sacrificing today was not only worth it, but very important to the future of the Middle East and the world. Do you share that?
That's certainly true, Senator. I probably learned not to speak to wire reporters and even to watch out for senators who want one-word answers. Yeah. It tends to compress complex issues.
But you agree with the fundamental principle here that what we did was a justified and enhanced the security of the United States and the world by removing Saddam Hussein from power.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's important to establish because now in this political season, those are attempted to be mixed, that because we didn't find the weapons of mass destruction, therefore the conflict was not justified. That's why I think it's important to establish those salient facts. Duelfer, and thank you, General, for your great work. Sort of a follow-up. So therefore, knowing the history of Saddam Hussein, his use of weapons of mass destruction, he had them in 1991, is there any doubt in your mind that if Saddam Hussein were in power today and there were no restrictions or sanctions placed on him that he would be attempting to acquire weapons of mass destruction, Mr. Duelfer?
To me, I think that's quite clear, but more importantly, it was quite clear to many of the senior advisors around Saddam. He had an exquisite sense of the use of power and influence. To him, it was a continuous spectrum, oil,
so
military
there's no
forces.
doubt in your mind. He's in power today, the sanctions are gone, he would be pursuing them because that was his history.
He had two life experiences where they saved him, which is, I think, why some of the pre-war assessments were colored. I mean, people would kind of look at it and said, well, why wouldn't he have these things? Okay, let me lead you through a couple of questions here because we only got 6 minutes. There is the belief, pervaded by some, this is sort of in line with what we were just saying, that there was a status quo in Iraq where basically the sanctions were in effect and things were fairly normal. And so therefore, we really had a choice between the status quo and attack on Saddam Hussein. Isn't it more likely, as you have stated in previous testimony, the sanctions were being eroded, American airplanes were being shot at. As you just mentioned, businessmen all over Baghdad were thinking that it was a matter of time before the sanctions were lifted. We have a burgeoning scandal in the oil for food program, and there was not a status quo. In other words, there was a steady deterioration
of any restraints that Saddam, real or imagined, that Saddam Hussein may have felt. Is that an accurate assessment of the situation in Baghdad?
That is a very accurate assessment. We spent a fair amount of time analyzing exactly that and trying to understand the strategy and tactics which Iraq was using to encourage the decay of sanctions.
So we didn't have a choice between maintaining the status quo and attacking Saddam Hussein. We had a situation which was rapidly deteriorating, and eventually, over time, in the view of most experts, Saddam Hussein would have been either relieved of or evaded these sanctions as more and more business was done and less and less actions on the part of the United Nations in enforcing those sanctions.
Sir, I think, we detail at great length exactly those sorts of conditions, but, we allow for others to draw their own conclusions. But my personal view is that the sanctions were in free fall. They were eroding. There was a lot of corruption. Were it not for 9/11, I don't know that they would exist today.
There's also the belief in some circles that this was an idea that was hatched either in the Department of State, or the Department of Defense, or somewhere in the White House right after 9/11. Let's go attack Saddam Hussein, and we'll invent this weapons of mass destruction issue to sort of as a pretext for it, and there was really a hidden agenda there. Why, in your viewpoint, did every single intelligence agency on Earth that I know of, the British, our friends the French, the Germans, the Israelis, every single intelligence agency believed that, as our intelligence agency did, believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction? How do you account for that?
Well, so that wasn't really my mandate. However, I do have an opinion.
I'd appreciate your opinion.
I think there's a lot of factors that are involved in that. One, as I mentioned before, Saddam had an experience where these weapons were vital to him. So why wouldn't he have them? And sort of, logically, why wouldn't he? Second, the United States had almost no contact with Iraq over more than a decade. To me, I sometimes forget that because I spent a lot of time there myself, but that was because I was with the UN. That means that the analysts who were forced to make judgments about this were actually in a very poor position. They didn't have any ground truth. They spent a lot of time looking at computer screens, but not a lot of time talking to Iraqis, not a lot of time walking around Iraqi plants and getting a feel for it. I mean, for example, if someone associates a particular vehicle with a chemical weapons program, as was done, there was something called a Samar Decon vehicle. Well, if you spend much time in Iraq, I mean, you would realize the Iraqis could be selling ice cream out of those vehicles. I mean, to associate a particular vehicle with a particular program, it's that kind of a feel for the ground that, frankly, was rare in the United States. Also, Saddam, as we learned from talking with him, was deliberately ambiguous. He gave a speech, I remember it quite well, in June of 2000, where he said, in essence, you cannot expect, and he wrote his speeches himself largely, by the way, but you cannot expect Iraq to give up a rifle and live only with a sword if its neighbors don't give up rifles and live with swords. Now that's kind of typical Saddamese, but it makes you think, well, he's saying he's going to hang on to his weapons of mass destruction. So we asked him what he meant by that. He said, well, he had two audiences in mind. This is a rare time when I think he actually was candid. But he said he had two audiences. One was the Iranian threat, which for him was quite potent, palpable. The Iranian threat was very, very palpable to him. And he did not want to be second to Iran. And he felt he had to deter them. So he wanted to create the impression that he had more than he did.
So every intelligence agency was fooled by him?
Well, not including, to a certain extent, the Iraqi intelligence agency. Because there were many Iraqis who were not convinced that there either were or were not special weapons within their arsenal.
Well, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman, and we need to, and I'm serving on the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission, we need to find out why we were all so wrong. But I think it's important for everybody to keep in mind that it was every intelligence agency respected on Earth that came to the same conclusion.